Hello, everybody, and welcome. It is my great pleasure to introduce today Daria Elagina, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the Hiob Ludolf Center for Ethiopian and Eritrean Studies of the University of Hamburg. Having trained in African and Asian Studies in St. Petersburg and in Hamburg, Daria obtained her PhD in 2019 from the University of Hamburg with a thesis entitled The Textual Tradition of the Chronicle of John of Nikiu towards the critical edition of the Ethiopian version. After her PhD, she worked as a research fellow for the project ģ'dāmā, Manuscript of Ethiopia and Eritrea, and in the project ENCODE, Bridging the Gap in Ancient Writing Culture. Currently, she is finalizing the project entitled The Chronicle of John Nikiu, Text Critical Edition and Digital Research Platform. And in January, she will launch a Emmy Noether Research Group at the University of Münster, which will work on the mathematical, calendric, and astronomical knowledge of Ethiopia and Eritrea. Her research combines textual criticism, manuscript studies, and digital humanities. And among her various publications, I would like to mention, for instance, her 2022 article entitled Encoding of Text Reuse in the Project of ģ'dāmā, and her 2021 paper, The Chronicle of John of Nikiu, its Arabic Vorlage and its Afterlife in Ethiopia. Today, Daria will present a paper entitled The Reception of the Chronicle of John of Nikiu in Ethiopia and Eritrea. Daria, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the kind introduction, and thanks to everybody who has joined the meeting today. I would love to share the screen with my PowerPoint presentation. Great. And just let me start from the beginning. Okay. So I hope you all can see my presentation. This is great. Yeah, so the topic of my talk today is the reception of the Chronicle of John of Nikiu in Ethiopia and Eritrea, which is in itself a fascinating topic, but of course I will first introduce you to the text in general and to its transmission. So a short introduction to the text. The Chronicle of John of Nikiu is a historiographical text composed in the 7th century in Egypt. It was originally written most probably in Coptic, although there are also some arguments for a Greek original. And the author of this text was an Egyptian bishop of the city of Nikiu named John. That's why also there is this traditional academic title for this work, The Chronicle of John of Nikiu, although it doesn't appear in any of the manuscripts. The text calls his author John Mudabbir, which is a transliteration of the Arabic Mudabbir, so meaning an administrator, in this case, of the monasteries. And that's why there is also a traditional title in Ethiopic, which is Johannes Mudabbir. This is how the Ethiopic tradition refers to this text, and we should keep this in mind. So later, we don't know actually at which point, probably around the 12th, 13th century, the text was translated into Arabic, which was a very natural process for texts in Egypt. And it was translated into Ethiopic at 1601. We know precisely about the circumstances of its translation to Ethiopic because we have a very detailed colophon. What is very interesting about this text that only the Ethiopic version has physical attestation. So the manuscripts of this text that are preserved are in Ethiopic only. The only source for the history of the transmission of this text is actually the text itself, and mostly its introduction and its colophon, which gives us some information on the process of translation. For example, we know also from the colophon that the text was translated from Arabic, so we can also assume that there was an Arabic version. Sorry, I don't understand how to. Okay, just some brief information on the existing editions and translations. The very first, let's say, summary of the content of this text was provided by Aman Zottenbeck in his 3 articles. And later he also produced the so far only published critical edition of the text in 1883 based on 2 manuscripts. And he translated the text also in French. In 1916, Charles published an English translation from the critical text of Zottenbeck. In my dissertation, I published a partial new critical edition based on 5 manuscripts instead of 2. And currently I am working on the complete new critical edition and translation of this important text in collaboration with Phil Booth from the University of Oxford. Now, what is very interesting about this text, and we also have to keep this in mind, that this text, the Chronicle of John of Nikiu, is based on a variety of other texts. So the library to which the author of this text, John, had access was incredibly rich. So his sources included written and probably also oral traditions of various genres. And the text shows parallels with some universal chronicles. The most famous are Chronographia of John Malalas, the Easter Chronicle, then also ecclesiastical history, such as those by Socrates, Theodoret, and many, many more. Different hagiographies, apocrypha, probably also local chronicles and legends, and so on and so on. So he had a huge variety of texts from which you draw from his sources. Now, we know that the text was composed in Egypt. And we know that there was the original was either, like most probably in Coptic, okay, probably also in Greek, but there was definitely a version in Coptic because we have also elements of Coptic in the text. And there was also an Arabic version. We don't have any manuscript in Egypt. It has been like actually a fascinating story because many researchers tried to find any fragments of this text in Egypt, but as far as I know, so far there has been found not even a single leaf of this text. But to give you an impression of the debates around the existence of the manuscript of this chronicle in Egypt, I can just provide you with a quotation from Millennium, who once said that probably I would know about the whereabouts of a Arabic version of this text. But however, he has been, although he has been he was contacted by many of his colleagues who asked for more details. He never replied to those requests. And actually, after his death, Kram even wrote that Amiluna boasted of knowing the whereabouts of the Arabic text, from which the Ethiopic was translated, has the secret died with him. I should also say that I constantly receive emails, gossips, and other bits of information that there should be a manuscript with this text in some monastery in Egypt, but I have never received any proofs its existence so far. Just to sum up the textual transmission of the Chronicle, so we have around the 7th century, it's a Coptic version, then Arabic around the 12th century probably, and then translation to Ethiopic in 1601. And so basically, we have 1,000 years of transmission in Egypt, but no traces of this transmission, which is actually fascinating. However, in Ethiopia, the Chronicle was very well received, and it has attestation as a direct tradition in 5 manuscripts. So I mentioned that the edition of Zottenberg was based on 2 manuscripts, but now we have attestation at least in 5 manuscripts. Then there is also a very rich indirect tradition of the Chronicle, where the Chronicle was used as a source to compile other texts. For example, Vita of John Chrysostom, which is transmitted in 18 manuscripts, Vita of Cyril of Alexandria, at least 5 manuscripts, actually probably more. And then there is also an Ethiopic commentary on the Pentateuch, so far transmitted in 1 manuscript or attested in 1 manuscript, which also uses Chronicle of John of Nikiu as a source. And very rich and complicated ʻandǝmtā tradition, which is basically commentaries in Amharic to religious texts. And this is this part of the tradition on which I want to speak today in more detail. I also say from the very beginning that I will discuss this tradition based on printed editions, and I want to express my gratitude to Professor Mesha, who, if I see saw it right here, is also present today, for providing me the scans of these important printed editions. So just to sum up, the Ethiopic tradition of the Chronicle of John of Nikiu. According to my current hypothesis, there was once a draft translation from which we have which was the source for the commentary on the Pentateuch. Then we have these 5 manuscripts spread like through 3 branches, and this like Vita of Cyril of Alexandria and of John Chrysostom apparently derived from a different manuscript based on their based on the textual analysis. And there is this ʻandǝmtā tradition, which I don't know where to put, and I will show you why it is very difficult to locate it in this stemma curriculum. First, what is actually ʻandǝmtā commentaries? ʻandǝmtā is a corpus of traditional interpretations of religious texts. Its main languages are Amharic and Ethiopic. So basically, it's much more Amharic, but when the commentary quotes a source text, most cases it will quote it like with very high probability in Ethiopic. For those who don't know, Amharic is the modern language, yeah, and Ethiopic is a language of the written tradition. The tradition shows parallels with the Alexandrian, with the Alexandria school, as well as with other exegetical traditions. It's a very, very complex tradition, which apparently was influenced by many different other traditions. And ʻandǝmtā tradition also refers to various other texts as a source for commentaries and interpretations. It also uses, interestingly, a set of some technical terms. So by providing commentary, it also says what kind of a commentary this is. Here I put together a couple of reference works on ʻandǝmtā commentaries. This is not, of course, a full list, but these are the works that I found most useful for my current research, and to which I will also sometimes refer. In the publication by Professor Mesha from 2011, there is a fuller bibliographical list and an overview of the study of this tradition with more details. So, the Chronicle was used apparently as a source for ʻandǝmtā commentaries, and Coley, in his publication from 1883, identified 3 cases, namely 1 case in the commentary to Ezekiel, 1 to Luke, and to the writings of Isaac of Nineveh. Today we will speak about the 2 first cases, and I will probably say a couple of words on the 3rd one in the question and answers session. Again, I will base my research on the editions of these ʻandǝmtā commentaries. And again, many thanks to Professor Mesha for supplying me with the scans. So the first case is a commentary to Ezekiel 16:3. And first, I would love just to remind you what this what this verse is about, and say this is what the sovereign Lord says to. Sorry, I need to move the. Says to Jerusalem, your ancestry and birth were in the land of the Canaanites. Your father was an Amharic, and your mother a Hittite. Here, just to give you an impression what the Amharic commentary looks like. Probably there are some of you can read Amharic, some of you cannot. I will provide also my translation, but this is how it looks like. And this is classified by the commentator as Tariq, meaning some sort of illustrative story. So here follows my translation. The first one who made habitable and founded Jerusalem was called Cyrus. John Johannes Medaber, we remember this is a traditional title of the Chronicle of John of Nikiu in Ethiopic, in the 4th chapter calls him the son of the king of Egypt and Nubia who reigned in Canaan. Having crossed from Egypt, he gained power over them by force. He named his land after his name ﷺ, which means the house of grace and mercy, as I said, and in Hebrew it is called ﷺ, with a reference to John 5:2. Sidus begot Salem, and Salem is called like so after Salem. Salem begot Melchi and Melchizedek. Melchizedek means the king of righteousness. He was called the king of Salem, and he named it, that is Salem, Jerusalem, which means the king of peace, the city of peace. This name remains well established. I also want to say many thanks to Professor Felix Salam Solomon Yerga and to Professor Hewan Simon Maria for going through my Amharic translation. Still, all the errors are mine, and but many thanks for them for checking. So, as I told you, so there is a reference actually to the Chronicle of John of Nikiu, which is again the traditional title is Johannes Medaber. And the text precisely says that that something that follows is said in the 4th chapter of the Chronicle. Well, the Chronicle is indeed divided in 122 chapters, so we can easily check what chapter 4 says, but actually chapter 4 says something very different. It says that it is told about Canaan, the son of Arphaxad, who was born from Shem, the son of Noah, that he was a wise and intelligent man. He began to write down astrolabers after the delusion. After him, the Indians wrote it. This is what chapter 4 says. So nothing actually on Melchizedek or Jerusalem, but there is chapter 27, which is on Melchizedek. And when we compare it piece by piece with the commentary in Amharic, and the text of the chapter, we find also parallels indeed. So the ʻAndǝmtā commentary says, John Medaber in the 4th chapter calls him the son of the king of Egypt and Nubia who reigned in Canaan. And in chapter 27, the Chronicle of John of Nikiu, we found following information. He descended from the tribe of Sidus, the son of the king of Egypt and Nubia. What the Egyptians tell of him. Instead, this priest reigned over Canaan, and he was from a powerful tribe. And another bit of information in the ʻAndǝmtā commentary is the following. Having crossed from Egypt, he gained power over them by force. He named his land after his name ʻBetă-Saïda, which means the house of grace and mercy. As I said, and in Hebrew it is called ʻBetă-Saïda, reference to John 5:2. And in the Chronicle, we read also something very close. When he warred with them, they were subjected to him. While they were pleased with him, he dwelt there, built a city, and named it after his name Sidon, which is reckoned in Canaan until today. And here we also have a very interesting case with this reference to John 5.2, because actually John in this case refers to a pool which is called Bethesda, and not necessarily a city. But if you will compare the Ethiopic Bible, it also indeed says Beta Saida, which is probably also some sort of like folk's etymology, because in Ethiopic Bet is of course house, and Beta Saida is house of Saida, probably also the house of Sirus and so on. So there is something that we have to study a little bit more, but a reference to the Chronicle is pretty obvious in this case as well. When it goes further and says that Melchizedek means the king of righteousness, he was called the king of Salem, and he named it, that is Salem, Jerusalem, which means the king of peace, the city of peace. This name remains well established. This is also somehow parallels with the Chronicle of John of Nikiu. Indeed, Melchizedek means the king of righteousness. He reigned over Canaan and built a city in Golgotha, which is called Zion, and is Salem, and the meaning of its name in the Hebrew language is a city of peace. And it is Salem that is called Jerusalem because peace dwelt in Zion, that is Melchizedek. So although it's not like very, you might also see that I had to take out some pieces of information from the Chronicle and to squeeze the text to find like to have it like really parallel to the text of the ʻAndǝmtā commentary, because this information in chapter 27, which is here like very well combined in ʻAndǝmtā commentary, is somehow spread here and there. So you need really to go through the text of chapter 27 several times to find the parallels to this ʻAndǝmtā commentary. But then you have the second case, which is Luke 13:4-5. Again, I want to remind you what Luke says. Of those 18 who died when the tower in Siloam fell on them, do you think they were more guilty than all the others living in Jerusalem? I tell you no, but unless you repent, you too will all perish. What the ʻAndǝmtā commentary says in this case, you see on the screen again. If you know Amharic, you're welcome to read. In this case, the commentary says that this is hatata, or really like sort of commentary or explanation, not an illustrative story, but a commentary of a different type. And here is my translation. It was said that this tower would collapse and destroy people. At the time of rain, when they gathered inside and stayed there, it crushed and destroyed them. But John, that's Johannes Medaber, again, the Chronicle of John of Nikiu, said that at the time of the massacre of the innocents, when the soldiers of Herod gathered inside and were saying, I destroyed 10, I destroyed 15, I destroyed 20, I'm no longer who I was. This, I'm not sure about the translation. Yellem is a little bit a strange expression. I'm not quite sure about its translation. This tower collapsed and by pressing down on them, destroyed them. So now I know the Chronicle of John of Nikiu pretty well. You know, I had to read it, I don't know, 15 times or so. There are chapters on chapter 7 of 65, 66 on Herod, but there is nothing on the massacre of the innocent in the Chronicle. So this piece of information to which the ʻAndǝmtā commentary refers is just not in the Chronicle. And this is also very interesting that the source for this story narrated in the commentary has not been identified so far, at least like by me. I don't know where this story of the soldiers of Herod gathering in the tower and, I don't know, like boasting, not boasting, like where does this story come from? I don't know. But it's definitely not in the version of the Chronicle of John of Nikiu that I have in the manuscripts. I'm not sure whether this account is indeed unique. but probably I could not identify its source. But as I told you, the Chronicle of John of Nikiu actually sometimes preserves also unique information from its sources, and the sources are no longer there. And apparently John also had a very rich library, and we don't know how rich this library was at the end, and whether it is imaginable that this account might have been in the Chronicle or not. But it's just not in the manuscripts. So what are the solutions for this problem? So either there was a lost part of the Chronicle to which the commentary refers, but we don't have it in any of the manuscripts. And maybe it's also misattribution. Probably Johannes Meddaber was a sort of like a very authoritative source, and they just misattributed some story and thought that this would, I don't know, make this story much more reliable if they say that this belongs actually to the text composed by John of Nikiu. Or probably one of my theories as that there was a certain transformation of the title of the text, Johannes Meddaber, into a label or a title for a collection of texts. Probably at a certain point, this like the text or a manuscript with the Chronicle of John of Nikiu accumulated also other minor texts, and which were also associated with the Chronicle in the end, and that's why there is this sort of like misattribution. In this case, not necessarily misattribution, but just a very different usage of the title Johannes Meddaber. So I don't know what the right solution is for this problem, but I would say that by this case study, I'm pretty sure that it is worth looking at these ʻAndǝmtā commentaries, and also to study the indirect transmission of texts in general, to probably better understand their reception and the complexity of their textual transmission. And yeah, this is more or less my conclusions. I think that I have run out of time. I would love to switch to our question and answer session.
Thank you very much, Daria, for a wonderful, wonderful talk with very, very interesting material. So we have time for questions now. So as ever, if you have one, please raise your hand or your digital hand, or if you cannot speak, just put it in the chat. Just to start us off, it's really interesting cases, and also very familiar to me from a Syriac perspective, where you have in the Church of the East for sure, in the exegetical tradition in the 9th century, late 8th and 9th century, where they are using historical sources for their exegetical commentaries, because basically what you're doing is you're reconstructing biblical history. So that's a great, much later example of the same principle. So my question would be regarding the Ethiopic translation. When this translation is made, is there any reflection on the purpose of the translation? Is it just to have the historical text? Or are they saying in colophons or wherever, we're also going to use this for this specific purpose?
Yeah, they were actually aimed at using this text to save their soul and body. Why? Because that was the time when the Chronicle was translated, was also the time of the activities of the Jesuits in the country. And John of Nikiu, being like Miaphysite bishop, also of course explained the fall of the Romans in Egypt and the conquest of Egypt by the Arabs, of course, through the deviation of the Romans from the true faith. So apparently the text was translated for educational purposes, and probably for the educational purposes for the court, specifically for the court. So to prevent at that time, the throne was occupied by a very young King Jacob, and he showed also he was very on friendly terms with the Jesuits. So probably the main purpose was to show him what this what the consequences could be. And then also when we look at the transmission of the Chronicle, at least 2 of the manuscripts were also commissioned by the royal court and granted to important monasteries. So, and they were also bound, for example, not bound together, but like the same manuscripts also transmit other, let's say, ideological texts. So basically, yeah, the purpose is pretty clear.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And maybe one more question before I let George ask a question. Are they continuing the text as well, or is it just the translation, and or is there a continuation, any expansions, or aside from colophons, or is it just finishing at, what is it, 8th century or 7th century?
Well, not considerable extension. So there is the colophon is pretty long, and it also sums up, let's say, the main purpose of the text, like namely again to show that like why the Romans failed, so to say. But otherwise, there are of course like here and there some glosses, but this is the maximum. So, but I don't see any considerable reworking, let's say, of the text.
Okay, thank you. Georgia?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for this rich
Yeah.
presentation.
No, I'm on it now.
Can you
What?
hear me?
Bank statement.
Yeah, I for sure learned a lot. I was curious to hear more, if you can say a few words about the rest of the tradition, because if I remember correctly, from your stemma, the indirect tradition, I mean, there was a branch of the indirect tradition that was a different branch. So I was wondering whether if you looked at that part as well, if you saw the same problems with chapters not matching, or sources that are difficult to place, and what also made you think that this is actually a different branch?
Specifically because of the chapter numbering, these 2 texts, like these 2 vitas, they refer to the chapter numbering in which is just not in any of the manuscripts. And it's also it's a pretty complex problem also with the numbering of chapters in the existing manuscripts, but it's obvious that this like 2 texts, they were copied from a manuscript that had just a different numbering, actually the correct one, honestly, because none of the existing, like none of the surviving manuscripts has a correct numbering of chapters. Yeah. Thank you.
Right, thanks.
Okay, there is a question in the chat from Barakat, which I will read. The commentary on Ezekiel, not the manuscript but the published version, was prepared by, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Aleka Kidane Wole Kifle. I apologize if I haven't. A renowned scholar of his time. His commentary differs from traditional commentaries in many ways. Could we assume that he had read the Chronicle of John Madabat?
Oh, it's a good question. Thanks also for pointing that his commentary might differ from the traditional commentaries. I tried to work with the manuscripts with ʻAndǝmtā commentaries, but they're very complex, also very complex in layout. So that's why I switched to the editions. But this is a good question. This is a good point. I will write it down, and I will have to make some more research on that. Thank you, Barakat.
Aaron?
Thank you, Daria. This was quite interesting. As you might imagine, I would like to take you up on your offer to hear a bit more about Isaac of Nineveh.
Well, yeah, so actually in this case, it's a very short commentary, and basically it's rather a sort of expanded translation, where the term Zena is a little bit explained in details. So the Zena is sort of like history, maybe sort of like historiography, and there also the commentary simply lists the works that he thinks belong to Zena, and amongst them is also John of Nikiu, which is also interesting. So to see how the tradition identified this text as belonging to this specific genre. Yeah, but this is what I could understand from this commentary so far, that it's like showing, like, yeah, Zena, for example, is something like John of Nikiu.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have another question, which doesn't necessarily relate to the Ethiopic reception, but I was wondering about your thoughts about whether or not there was a Greek original or whether it's a Coptic original. Have you, through your research, been able to, I mean, how would you even determine that? I just wondering about your thoughts. Or have you just sort of said, we'll probably never know unless we find another witness?
Well, even if we will find some like a Coptic manuscript, still the question would be, is it translation or is it an original? So the problem is that, of course, many sources of John were written in Greek. This is for sure. So that's why whenever we have the traces of translation from Greek, well, the question is it like something that was just was the process of translating his sources into Greek, of translating the Chronicle from Greek into like any other language? But I think that the presence of a Coptic, at least Coptic version, is undoubtful, because there are several cases where we have the remnants of the Coptic articles, of some Coptic constructions ossified and just transliterated into Arabic, then transliterated into Ethiopic. Of course, this is all a little bit complicated because, you know, we can always say that it's actually not necessarily the Coptic article, but just a preposition in Arabic or something. But there is a case, for example, with the word henotikon, which appears in the Chronicle in several chapters and several constructions, and it's always more or less babunikon, which is absolutely parallel with the Coptic pinotikon. So you cannot, if you have it in different grammatical constructions which do not supposed to have any preposition, then and it's like throughout the text, then well, probably there was a Coptic version in any case. Whether there was the original, like the main argument against the Coptic original, that this would be the only world chronicle in Coptic, which is I think it's an interesting argument, but we don't know whether John ever thought that he's writing a world chronicle. He was simply writing some chronicle, and the fact that he started like from Adam and Eve, probably again just based also on his sources and like the other texts that he read. I don't know. I don't think that it's really a good argument, the fact that we just don't have any other cases of world chronicles written in Coptic. Well, everything happens for the first time. So yeah, but I'm pretty sure, like, I'm rather for the Coptic original, I would say.
Okay. And just curious, because now responding to what you just said about this Ethiopic text, which clearly in some cases, well, corrupted is probably the wrong word, but these sort of mistranslations that are kept even from the Arabic. So are there instances in the Ethiopic tradition where they try to clean those texts up, or is it always just copied without much, well, without much of a critical approach is maybe the wrong word, but is there any kind of attempt to make the text more readable?
There are both strategies. So sometimes they just translate or partially transliterate and don't make any attempts at like repairing the text. But sometimes we do have attempts at restoration or something like that. It happens, for example, with personal names that were super corrupt, and then we're like, okay, actually it might also be John, so we just right, and that was Joan or something. So an attempt, to sometimes it doesn't really help a lot, I should say. So it's rather, you understand that, well, probably the name was so badly corrupt that, yeah, they just tried to give it some sense. But it's not very often. So we have indeed like many cases where it was just transliterated.
Yeah, fascinating. Georgia, you have another question?
Yeah, I do. And it's again a question that comes from not knowing enough about the topic. And you might have said it and I might have missed it, but I was again curious about the manuscript tradition in the sense, because I got that the text was translated into Ethiopic in 1601. But what dates are the manuscripts, and are they transmitting only the Chronicle, or is the Chronicle transmitted with? It's just basically curious to know how the transmission looks like.
So there is one manuscript from the 20th century that transmits Chronicle only, and it is a paper manuscript. So it was a copy done on the request. So other like more traditional manuscripts are from the probably rather 18th century, and they some of them transmit a very like two of them transmit the same set of texts, a little bit like shuffled around, but they listed the same, and they were also studied by Massimo Villa, by my colleague. For example, they all also transmit Kebra-Nagast, which is also like a sort of like a ideological text of the Ethiopian royalty, let's say. And other manuscripts, it's never, except for this very late one, the text doesn't appear alone. So it's always together with some other texts.
Yeah, okay, thanks. And if I can I ask another one, Andy? Turning this time to the ʻandǝmtā commentary, what other sources does it use in a nutshell, if you can, just to have an idea? Because I can imagine that if, again, I'm trying to make sense of some, like to understand how it works, this tradition might also start a bit like after the translation of the Chronicle, right? The commentary composed. Or do we have something before and then with it?
Well, when the tradition started, it's also very hard to identify, because the manuscripts, like the manuscripts with the ʻandǝmtā commentaries are relatively late, so these commentaries were written down at a rather late stage. But it's very hard to determine when exactly it started, and because of this whole, also it developed, of course, through the time with the translation of new texts like the Chronicle and so on. There's one interesting fact about this ʻandǝmtā commentary and about the Chronicle, is that the Ethiopian who was involved into the translation of the Chronicle of John of Nikiu, we know him by name, his name was ʻandǝmtā. He's also mentioned in this commentary. He's also mentioned as a person. So the commentary interestingly also says that, yeah, there was this ʻandǝmtā. He had also some sort of like a very extravagant behavior, I would say, according to this commentary. And I cannot exclude actually that was also probably him who introduced probably the Chronicle into this commentary, because he knew the text very well. But coming back to your very first question on the sources of the ʻandǝmtā commentary, there are really a huge corpus of sources. So on the one hand, other biblical books are used to write comments on the biblical books, but also all the sorts of like history, like chronographic works. There's not only John of Nikiu, there are also some other later works composed in Arabic that were translated into Ethiopic that are also some sort of like world histories. They are also part of the sources for ʻAndǝmtā commentaries and so on and so on. I think that Coley makes a good job in like really listing all the sources, so I might not be I don't think that I can now list all of them, but the corpus is like really impressive.
Okay, great. Thanks. Really, thanks again also for illuminating all these aspects. Thanks.
I have maybe one more question relating to something else that you mentioned, which is these two cases where you have lives of Cyril of Alexandria, and I can't remember now who was the other one, extracted from the Chronicle. And I worked on sort of a parallel from the Armenian side, where you have a Syriac author, Jacob of Sauruk, and the Armenian life is extracted from an Armenian translation of a Syriac historical text. So you have, again, a similar pattern. I was wondering if you could just, if you know anything, just maybe briefly to say a few words about this. How recent is that process? Is that when were those lives created? Is it also 17th century? Because I saw the tree, but I can't remember exactly in terms of timings when this was going on.
Oh, well, the time it should be, yeah, something like 17th century when these texts were composed. It's like, yeah, there's two Vitas, John Chrysostom and Cyril of Alexandria. I think they were even compiled by the same person because they use the same set of more or less overlapping set of sources. So there is John of Nikiu, there is Amid, which is also a historiographical text translated from Arabic into Ethiopic. Then there's also Synaxary, and they are composed in a very, like in the same manner, really just taking bits of information from different sources, identifying the sources, which is also so cool, which is not very common. So you really have like, and John of Nikiu says that and that, and Veda Ahmed says that and that. And even some, like in case of John of Nikiu, even with a reference to a chapter, which is like super useful. And I think that, yeah, I would even suggest that they were composed by one and the same person, judging from the same sources, same method, same wording sometimes. It's a fascinating case of this, like, compilation, like, okay, composition of a new text by compiling from different sources.
Okay.
And these are really like rather biographies. I'm not even like a really biographical information. So historical, yeah, information, let's say. All
right. Does anyone have a question that they want to ask? Now's the time. No? Okay, and then please join me in thanking Daria for a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time.
I want to say, like, I'm very happy to see Basil here. Very, very nice to see you. And so many thanks to everyone, and to also Johannes. I remember that we talked a lot during the last Coptic Congress, and very happy that you joined. And many thanks to everyone else for joining. Really, I appreciate it. And I appreciate your questions
Daria.
and comments.
It was very interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you indeed. Thank you, Daria, for this presentation, this fascinating presentation, the discussion, and yeah, thanks everybody for joining, and see you next time.
Yeah.
Bye.
Have a nice day, everyone.